Was your motivation to go into the service and to
I just wanted to fly.
Do you know
And
why?
I wanted to fly from the time like I said, from Colonel Lindbergh, but my mother used to be very gracious and let me join the Aero Club called then Bamberger's, now Macy's. And they had meetings every Saturday, tell you how to build little model airplanes out of balsa wood and rice paper and that sort of thing. I just liked it. I spent all my time doing that instead of doing my homework. It's a miracle I ever was able to get into the military academy with what I didn't do in high school. Then I decided I wanted to get into my favorite project, and that was be a flyer. Colonel Lindbergh was my hero after he flew across the Atlantic in 1927. I decided that I'd like to be in the Army Air Corps. And the only way to get in was to go through a military academy. I went up and was admitted to West Point in July of 1937 and was there until 1940, in which I did something the academy wasn't very grateful about. I wrote to the superintendent of the Army in Washington then, that was the Secretary of War, and asked him if I was eligible to become an aviation cadet. And I got an answer back, and the answer was yes. And I grabbed it, and I left the academy in the fall of 1940. I was accepted as an aviation cadet for training in February 1941. The reason I did that, it was a big decision, and there were times when I still regret it that I didn't finish in the academy with all my friends then. But I was faced with the choice of either being a flyer or not. The way they picked your field in the academy when you graduated was where you're standing in your class. And of course the Gold Star students all picked graduate training for engineers, and the lower ones would go into field artillery or coast artillery, and what was left wound up in the infantry. And I regret, and with all the respect I have for the infantry, I wanted to be a pilot. And I had made that choice. I still look at that letter sometimes that I wrote and half regret it. But I'm not sorry. I think I'll do it again.
Most vivid memories from D-Day, June 6th, 44.
The day itself, I think my greatest concern was getting my mission done. I was worried about failing. We were assigned targets to dive bomb bridges and that right in back of the beachhead. The weather wasn't perfect. We had an overcast. That bothered me because I needed 15,000 feet to dive bomb. Give me some room. I was leading my squadron. I had my target and the other squadrons had their own targets. It was not a good day weather-wise for flying, not in the morning. And I was worried about locating my target. That's what worried me the most. I wasn't worried about the enemy. I was worried, I'm concerned about my own people, helping them out. Because what D-Day was like from the air, you can't believe. With the ships on the ground, on this channel. My first dive bombing mission, I was lucky. I found a hole in the cloud and recognized the Isle of Jersey. So I picked up my navigation from there and was able to get my target. Later that day, I escorted the gliders across the channel, and that was heartbreaking. was when the C-47s are dragging those gliders, they're going maybe 120 miles an hour. They released the gliders, they had no place to land. The Germans have been setting that up for years, you know, with barriers and steel posts and all kinds of situations on the ground. Those poor gliders that hit the ground and go all over the place. And everybody in it, that broke my heart. And you could see what was happening on the ground, on the water's edge, with the boats that were on fire and troops all over the place. That broke my heart. It still does. I can think of the whole war at a glance, and nothing at any particular time bothers me. Even if there's some of the invasions and the battles in St. Lo and Kasserine and St. Mary-Guise, but D-Day was heartbreaking. It hurts to think about it still. The poor guys, you know, I was a pilot, I was trained. I was what you might call a professional. I knew what I was doing, and I knew my equipment and what I had to do, and I knew my limitations. But when you think of the hundreds of poor young fellows that could in, just with a rifle in their hand, throw them off the boat and tell them to go, that hurts. I mean, the poor kids are sick and cold and everything else, all the odds against them, and yet that's what won the war. Don't ever forget it. Not me. They're the ones.
They're the heroes that you mentioned.
I go to the American Cemetery and you see them, the names, all private, corporal sergeants, 18, 19, 20 years old. They were the ones, they're the people that, they did it, not me, not General Eisenhower, not General Patton, or any of them, but these young kids that had practically no training. I'm not saying they weren't trained at all, they were, but not like me. I was a pro. I knew what I was doing. I knew my limitations. I knew what I could do and what I couldn't do. But they didn't have that opportunity. They were told to get on the boat and go, and they went. And you have to admire the country for that. They're the heroes. I was supposed to be on my way home, but the new squadron commander asked me if I'd stay with him for a couple of days. And he'd appreciate, you know, my input on the flights, and I agreed, which I shouldn't have, but I did. One of the first missions we had was a dive bombing mission over Aachen, Germany. We were just getting near the target. I was flying tail end Charlie, he was leading, and I was talking to him on the radio when I got hit by an 88 millimeter shell, German flak. They were the 88 millimeters. I was lucky. It blew up most of the cockpit. My engine was running a little bit, but not much. The wingman came up and told me that my gear was all shot out from underneath. All I was worried about was altitude. I looked at 2,000 pound bombs go. I don't know who they hit. But
somewhere in Germany, right?
Yes. But I was worried about my glide, if I could get back to Belgium. And I managed enough altitude to get back. I crashed into Belgium, and 2 GIs pulled me out of the cockpit because the thing was ready to catch on fire. We still had a lot of fuel on board. I wasn't hurt too badly. My right leg I was damaged a little bit, but St. Lo, right after D-Day, I was, I think, the first fighter squadron in the Normandy to operate out of there. They're an old script called A4. That's the one I've been trying to find. I can't find it. But I took my squadron in there like 10 days after D-Day. And we were there until we moved up to Paris in August of 44. But in between, we had the big Battle of St. Lo. After D-Day and after the Americans did manage a foothold on the cliffs and everything, we sort of were standing still. And I didn't know what was going on, but General Patton was raring to go with the Third Army. And they asked us to strafe and dive bomb St. Lo. We leveled the town practically for a week. And Patton came in, because St. Lo was a turning point for heading towards Germany. There was no point in going any farther south. There was nothing down there. We had to take St. Lo so Patton could make the turn and send his tanks and everything east towards Paris. That was the next target. And I had a rather uncomfortable experience after St. Lo. I had a group executive officer from Charleston, South Carolina, not a flyer. He took care of all the troops. He did all the work. I just signed papers. I like to just be with the flight line all the time with the pilots. And he had told me the day after we finished St. Lo, please go with him, take a ride in the Jeep. He wanted to show me. He said, you never see what kind of damage you people really do. I'm going to take you down and show you. And he took me down. And you couldn't believe the wrecks, the mess. On the way back, I mean, he was driving. He pulled the Jeep over the side of the road. Because it may be 2 or 3 miles outside of St. Lo. That was where we had all the hedgerows. And American infantry had so much trouble with the Germans getting over those things. They were a disaster. Worse than barbed wire and anything else. But Major Stanton said, Wayne, I'll be right back. I didn't know where he was going. I was sort of daydreaming anyway. Thinking about nothing in general, which is the best way to live. Don't worry about what you did or where you're going or what's next. He was gone maybe 2 or 3 minutes. I heard this big explosion. And I started, right away I thought something happened. And I started to call him. No answer. I felt I had to do something. I stopped a couple of Jeeps that were going down the road and asked them if they'd help me, and they kept right on going. I didn't blame them. So I ran across a big field a couple of times just yelling his name. Didn't hear anything. It was definitely quiet otherwise. So I'm not gaining anything here. I drove back to my squadron and got the flight surgeon and told him better bring an ambulance and some crew and help me see if we can search on our own. By the time I got back, they had some Army Corps of Engineers were going around with checking for landmines, and they found my good friend on the other side of the hedgerow. He had evidently jumped off the top of the hedgerow right onto a German teller mine, which explodes tanks. And that was the end of that. But I couldn't believe where I had run before that I hadn't stepped on the mine because it wouldn't let me even go near the place. It chased me away. And that was heartrending. That was heartbreaking to lose a person like that in such a dumb accident, you know.
Do you have any memory from those missions?
Kasserine was the turning point in the North African War. If Germans beat us at Kasserine, they would have turned the whole thing around. The German army was engaged with the British army, Montgomery and Alexander in southern Africa. And Montgomery turned them around. And the Germans, instead of just, hanging back in there a little bit, turned around and headed for the American line that almost caught us by surprise. And Kasserine was one of the key points where they could have broken through all our forces that Eisenhower had in North Africa. And it was a fierce battle for about 5 days. We turned them there, and when we turned to Kasserine, we took them all the way to Tunis then. That was a turning point.